Welcome back to Hardball. As the battle continues over the budget and a possible government shutdown this weekend, in fact, as early as Friday, one issue contained in the budget is a Republican-backed measure that would strip Planned Parenthood of its federal funding, money that goes directly toward cancer screenings and birth control, among other things. So why is the Republican Party going after women's rights and health care in this regard? Joan Walsh, our friend, joins us. She writes for Salon. And Melissa Harris Perry is a professor at Princeton. I want to start with Joan, and I'm going to be careful here because, well, here's Republican Mike Pence. Let's hear what he has to say. He's spearheading this cause. Let him speak for himself. He says he's willing to hold up the whole budget, bring down the government over one issue, Planned Parenthood. Listen to him say it.
Are you willing to hold up this entire budget over defunding Planned Parenthood?
Well, of course I am. I think the American people have begun to learn that the largest abortion provider in the country is also the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X, and they want to see that come to an end. You know, I think there's a broad consensus in this country, regardless of where you stand on the subject of abortion. There's a broad consensus for decades now opposing public funding of abortion and abortion providers. We're going to dig in and we're going to fight for the principle that taxpayers should not have to subsidize the largest abortion provider in the country, namely Planned Parenthood of America.
Well, let's get to the clarity here, Joan. The issue here is not funding of abortion, which is outlawed under the Hyde Amendment. We've been debating that for years. That's where it stands. That's where the law is. Whatever you think of it, that's the law. He's arguing about defunding Planned Parenthood, which I understand to be very helpful to women in terms of health screening, helping them, poor women especially, who wouldn't normally have a good doctor, who wouldn't have the access to birth control. And if you don't like abortion, and very few people think it's good to have so many abortions, one way to reduce them is having less unexpected or unwanted pregnancy.
Exactly.
And the one way to deal with that is called birth control.
Exactly.
And why people are against birth control and against abortion, you ought to be thinking about the serious thing you're concerned with and not the other part of it, which is birth control. Why do they want to get rid of birth control if they care about abortion? Big question.
Because they really are trying to muddy the waters. They really are trying to control women's lives. They don't care about poor women. And, you know, I know this is not a polite word to use, Chris, but he is lying. And he knows it. Not a dime of federal money goes to Planned Parenthood to fund abortions. Now, they do have a separate operation that performs some abortions, but the bulk of what they do, and that's all private money, it's in separate buildings. It has separate administration. It's practically a different organization. Planned Parenthood gets federal dollars to provide family planning and, as you said, health screening services, and that's what they're trying to take away. 800,000 breast exams last year, Chris, 1 million cervical cancer screenings. 6 out of 10 women who go into Planned Parenthood say that that's where they get their primary health care. They get a range of services when they walk in there, not merely birth control services. So it's really unconscionable, and it will increase the number of abortions. That's the ironic and sick thing.
You know, I look at that, Professor Harris Perry, and I look at the people who, it's always interesting to see who's not on the team. Scott Brown is not on the team that wants to kill Planned Parenthood. Olympia Snowe, a Republican woman senator. Susan Collins, another Republican woman senator. Lisa Murkowski, another Republican. Well, there's a pattern here, isn't there? Women Republican senators don't like this attack. I always hear good things about Planned Parenthood, and not from people that are necessarily on the side of the pro-choice movement either. But why are they going after this group? The Republicans?
Well, yeah, sure. There's a couple of reasons. One is that by putting this on Planned Parenthood, and particularly by coming down to this sort of final moment and saying we will hold up the whole thing over the question of defunding Planned Parenthood, it allows, if there is in fact a government shutdown, for the blame to be placed not on obstructionist Republicans who are making a set of choices that the country simply cannot live with in the long term, but instead to kind of offset that blame on radical feminists who want to give people abortions. You see, what happens is then the scapegoat...
Who's doing that?
Well, see, that's what happens if the government shuts down around the Planned Parenthood question. In other words, the issue of will you hold the line on this? If the president and the Democratic Party don't hold the line on this, then they recognize that they have a very strong possibility of losing the support of women voters. However, if they do, then this sort of group of women who are reproductive rights advocates can be caricaturized as these sort of hardcore feminists who want to give people abortions. abortions, and they can be blamed for the shutdown.
No.
So there's this way that economic crisis creates moral panic. And so the Republican Party is taking advantage of the kind of economic downturn to generate a moral panic that allows for the scapegoating, in this case, of women and their supporters who are supportive of reproductive rights.
Let me ask you this, Joan, you and I are Catholic. Why don't the people who are against abortion, I respect all positions on this, believe it or not, why don't they get together and say, you know, all the rallies in the world, all the pro-life rallies in the world, which may be very good in terms of intentions, are not really stopping abortions or reducing their numbers. But birth control is. And whatever you think about abstinence, it has its role. But birth control also has its role, I think most people believe. And if it's not there, you're going to have a lot more unwanted pregnancies, a lot more abortions. And that's, but rallies don't stop abortion. Birth control does. So why do they want to kill it?
You know, there have been so many efforts.
Especially among poor people that may not be as organized in terms of using birth control. I'm looking at the statistics here, and that's the problem. Poor people who don't use birth control end up having pregnancies, and they have abortions. And that's in the numbers we've been looking at from Guttmacher.
Well, from the Guttmacher numbers show that if this goes through, the abortion rate for poor women in particular will double. I can't believe that anybody wants that on any side, Chris. And so, you know, there have been a lot of common ground conversations here. I'm a huge fan of Frances Kissling, who started Catholics for a Free Choice. She has tried to spearhead, and many other great faith leaders have tried to do this, a common ground conversation where we're going, let's fund contraception. Let's also fund feeding programs, the WIC Women and Infants program, so no woman ever has an abortion because she can't afford to have a child. They cannot get Republican support for these kinds of common ground efforts. So it's hypocrisy. They don't care really about stopping abortion. They just care about interfering in the lives of women, and as Melissa says, making women scapegoats. But this isn't going to work. There's a broad-based coalition to fight back. Americans support contraception. They support Planned Parenthood. We are the mainstream position. They are the crazies. I know you know Bill Clinton came out with a wonderful statement
There
today.
it is. Here's Bill Clinton's statement today. He doesn't make money on this issue. He's a former politician, but here he is. The Republicans' elimination of funding for Planned Parenthood will in the end cost more than it saves by ending the ability of millions of American women to receive family planning services, breast and cervical cancer screenings, and preventative health care at cost-efficient Planned Parenthood centers. And the denial of simple birth control and family planning services may well increase the number of unintended pregnancies and abortions in our country. Professor, there you have it from former President Clinton, who rarely issues statements like this. He's in this issue. Let's look at it. Your thoughts? Well, what do you mean talk about the feminist piece of this? I know you're a theoretician about this, and I want to hear, what is your theory politically about why a guy like Mike Pence, who everybody thinks is running for governor of Indiana, why is he pushing this?
Well, let me just point out one other thing. You said that birth control stops abortions, but let me tell you the other thing that we know tracks with the lowering of abortions and the lowering, by the way, of unwed mothers, all kinds of sort of social moral ills that the Republican Party has an anxiety about, and that is when the economy gets better, when people have jobs, when people are in an economic situation where they feel that they can bear the next child. Remember that the majority of women who seek termination services already have at least one child. These are not women who are unwilling to be mothers, who, if only they had the baby, they would realize how good life is with the baby. No, these are people often making very difficult economic choices. So in fact, what we need to do is to invest in communities and invest also in supporting those who are the poorest so that they can make a different set of choices around families. So why are the Republicans pushing this? Because they believe it energizes their base, because they believe that it gives them a space
I got to go to your
they
class
can be
someday
the
up
one
there.
voice.
Invite me up there. I want to go to Princeton. I want that prestige, too, from going up there. Anyway, thank you, Melissa Harris-Perry, professor at Princeton, and Joan Walsh, like me. We didn't go to Princeton. Anyway, up next. Maybe you did. Anyway, up next.